August 1969. The Las Vegas International Hotel. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, stands center stage before 50,000 screaming fans in what would become the most talked-about moment of his comeback tour. But something's wrong. Midway through his third song, Elvis stops moving. Completely. His guitar hangs motionless at his side, his eyes fixed on something in the distance that nobody else can see. 10 seconds pass. 20. 30. The band plays on, confused, waiting for their cue. 1 minute becomes 2. The crowd's roar fades to uncertain whispers. Is this part of the show? A heart attack. A breakdown. And then, at exactly the 10-minute mark, something happens that no one in that arena would ever forget. Elvis Presley hadn't performed a live concert in over 8 years. After dominating the 1950s and spending the 1960s trapped in a cycle of increasingly mediocre Hollywood movies, the King had become a punchline, a relic of a bygone era that the psychedelic generation had left behind. The Beatles had conquered. Dylan had revolutionized. Hendrix had redefined what a guitar could do. Elvis was yesterday's news, selling records to housewives who remembered when he'd scandalized their parents. But Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's enigmatic manager, had orchestrated something ambitious, a month-long residency at the brand-new Las Vegas International Hotel, the largest showroom in Nevada. It was a gamble. Vegas in 1969 wasn't the entertainment capital it would become. It was where careers went to die, where aging crooners played to gambling retirees. Critics predicted disaster. Elvis in Vegas? Might as well put him in a nursing home, one columnist sneered. The rehearsals had been brutal. Elvis, bloated from years of prescribed medication and fried peanut butter sandwiches, had to shed 30 pounds. He assembled a crack band, hired backing singers, and worked with choreographer Claude Thompson to create something electric, a show that would prove he still mattered. The jumpsuit, that iconic white outfit studded with jewels, was designed specifically for these performances. It caught the light like armor. Opening night had been transcendent. Elvis prowled the stage like a caged panther finally released, his voice stronger than it had been in a decade. He performed hits old and new, threw scarves to swooning women, joked with the audience, and reminded everyone why he'd been crowned the king in the first place. The reviews were rapturous. Tickets for subsequent shows sold out within hours. By the third week, scalpers were getting 5 times face value. But success brought pressure. Elvis, who'd always struggled with stage fright despite his confident persona, was taking more pills. Uppers to perform, downers to sleep, painkillers for a back injury from his karate training. His inner circle noticed the glassy eyes, the occasional slurred word, but nobody dared confront him. The colonel only cared about packed houses. Elvis's father, Vernon, was too intimidated. The Memphis Mafia, his gang of childhood friends turned paid companions, depended on his generosity for their livelihoods. On that August night, everything seemed normal. Elvis hit the stage at 8:30 p.m. sharp, the band launching into his opening number. The crowd, A mix of die-hard fans who'd followed him since the Louisiana hayride and curious newcomers drawn by the buzz erupted. He commanded that stage, every move calculated seduction. 2 songs in, everything was perfect. And then, mid-gesture, during the 3rd song, Elvis Presley simply stopped. At first, the 50,000 people packed into the International showroom thought it was a bit. Elvis was famous for his theatrical pauses, for making audiences wait for the money note. The band, professionals all, kept the groove going, vamping on the chord progression, waiting for their leader's cue. 30 seconds passed. Lead guitarist James Burton glanced at bassist Jerry Sheff, who shrugged imperceptibly. The drummer maintained the beat, steady as a heartbeat. But Elvis didn't move. His right arm remained extended in mid-gesture, fingers spread as if reaching for something intangible. His famous sneer had frozen into something else. Not quite fear, not quite ecstasy. His eyes, those heavy-lidded blue eyes that had melted millions of hearts, stared at a fixed point somewhere in the upper balcony. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, catching the spotlight. But he didn't blink. He didn't breathe visibly. He was a statue, a wax figure of himself. In the wings, stage manager Bones Howe frantically whispered into his headset, "Get the house lights ready. We might need to clear the room. Someone check if we've got a doctor in the building." Elvis's road manager Joe Esposito started toward the stage, then hesitated. What if this was some weird artistic choice? What if interrupting would humiliate Elvis in front of 50,000 people? The crowd's reaction evolved in waves. First came nervous laughter. This had to be a joke, right? Then concerned murmurs rippled through the audience as 1 minute became 2. Women in the front rows stood up, craning to see if Elvis was breathing. A few men shouted encouragement. "You got this, Elvis. We love you, King." 3 minutes in, the atmosphere shifted to genuine worry. Someone screamed. A woman fainted and had to be carried out by ushers. The band, displaying remarkable professionalism, began improvising. They'd transitioned from the song they'd been playing into a slow blues progression, buying time, creating a musical carpet that might cushion whatever was happening. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's rhythm guitarist and closest friend on stage, edged closer, trying to make eye contact, but Elvis's gaze remained fixed on that distant point. 4 minutes. 5. The house lights came up slightly, protocol for a medical emergency, but still, Elvis stood, frozen, that arm extended like a prophet mid-revelation. His chest rose and fell almost imperceptibly. He was breathing, at least. Security guards positioned themselves at the stage edge, ready to intervene. An ambulance was summoned to the loading dock, just in case. Colonel Parker, watching from his private box, gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. This could ruin everything. 6 minutes? 7. And then something extraordinary began to happen. It started in the cheap seats, the upper balconies where the real fans sat, the ones who'd scraped together money for tickets, who'd loved Elvis when he was dangerous, when parents locked their daughters away rather than let them see him gyrate on Ed Sullivan's stage. Someone began to sing, not one of Elvis's songs, but a hymn. Amazing Grace. One voice became 10. 10 became 100. By the 8th minute, thousands of voices were singing, filling the cavernous showroom with harmonies that seemed to come from another realm entirely. The band, recognizing what was happening, shifted their improvisation to match the hymn's chord changes. And still Elvis stood frozen. But now something was different. Tears began streaming down his face, cutting tracks through his stage makeup. Later, much later, when Elvis could finally talk about that night, and he didn't talk about it often, he described an experience that defied rational explanation. He said he'd been mid-gesture, about to deliver a line, when suddenly the entire showroom had transformed. The walls became transparent, revealing a vast darkness punctuated by countless points of light. Each light, he claimed, was a soul. Everyone in the audience, everyone who'd ever listened to his music, everyone who'd loved him or hated him or been moved by a song they'd heard on a car radio in 1956. "I could see my mother," he told his spiritual advisor Larry Geller weeks later, his voice barely a whisper. "Gladys, she was there in the light, and she was smiling, but also crying. She showed me everything, every person I'd touched with music, every moment of joy, every teenage girl who'd felt less alone because of a song, but also every disappointment, every time I'd chosen the easy path, every movie I'd made just for the paycheck, when I could have been making music that mattered." Elvis described the vision as simultaneously beautiful and devastating. He saw himself as a young truck driver walking into Sun Records, nervous and hopeful, with $4 to record a song for his mother's birthday. He saw the explosion of fame, the pandemonium, the way adults had feared him and teenagers had worshipped him. He saw the army years, the movie contracts, the slow dimming of the fire that had made him dangerous and vital. He saw himself becoming a caricature, playing it safe, letting fear and pills and the Colonel's conservatism turn him into an entertainer rather than an artist. But then the vision shifted. Gladys, or whatever divine force was speaking through her memory, showed him something else. She showed him the comeback, this Vegas residency, and the path it was opening. She showed him a future where he could reclaim his throne, where he could make music that mattered again, where he could be dangerous and vital and true. But, and this was the part that made him freeze in terror and awe, she showed him the cost. The pills would get worse. The isolation would deepen. The fame would become a prison. There would be glory, yes, but also degradation, triumph and tragedy intertwined. "She gave me a choice," Elvis said. "Right there on that stage, with 50,000 people watching, she gave me a choice. I could walk away, just leave the stage, leave Vegas, leave fame behind, and have a normal life. Or I could continue, knowing everything that was coming, the good and the bad, and see it through to the end." She told me either choice was okay, that she'd love me no matter what. For 10 minutes, Elvis stood in that space between choices, between worlds, between the person he'd been and the person he might become. He saw his own death, though he wouldn't speak of the details, and he saw the decades beyond it, the way his music would endure, the way Graceland would become a pilgrimage site, the way children not yet born would discover his songs and feel that same electricity their grandparents had felt. The hymn began filtering through his consciousness around the 8th minute. At first it was just a sound, distant and beautiful. Then he recognized it. Amazing Grace, the same hymn his mother used to sing while doing dishes in their tiny Tupelo shack, back when they had nothing but each other and faith. The voices of 50,000 strangers singing that hymn became a rope, pulling him back from wherever he'd gone, anchoring him to the present moment, to the stage, to his choice. At exactly the 10-minute mark, something visible shifted in Elvis. His fingers, frozen in mid-gesture, began to tremble. Then his whole arm shook, as if he were channeling lightning. The tears on his face had become a flood, mascara running in black streaks down his cheeks, ruining the carefully applied stage makeup. He blinked. The first time in 10 minutes anyone had seen him blink. And suddenly, his knees buckled. Charlie Hodge caught him before he could fall. And in that moment, every security guard tensed to rush the stage. But Elvis, with his friend's steadying arm around him, raised his other hand, a gesture that said clearly, "Wait, I'm okay. Give me a second." The 50,000 voices singing Amazing Grace faltered, then stopped, leaving only the band's gentle instrumental accompaniment hanging in the air like incense. Elvis straightened up, gently pushed Charlie away, and walked to the microphone on legs that seemed uncertain but determined. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the ocean of faces, some worried, some crying, all waiting. Then he spoke, his voice raw and broken in a way no one had ever heard the smooth-talking king sound before. He began, then stopped, started again. You just gave me something I ain't never had before. You gave me permission to be human." His southern accent, usually modulated for sophistication, came through thick and unfiltered. "I was somewhere else just then, somewhere important. And that song you sang, that brought me back. My mama used to sing that song." The silence in that massive showroom was absolute. Not a cough, not a whisper. 50,000 people holding their collective breath. "I'm gonna finish this show," Elvis continued. "But it's gonna be different from what we planned. Charlie, can you hand me the acoustic?" His friend quickly retrieved a guitar from backstage. Elvis slung it over his shoulder, and for the first time since the comeback started, he looked vulnerable. Just a man with a guitar. Like in the old Sun Records days, before the jumpsuits and the spectacle. What happened next would become legendary. Elvis, still crying, his voice cracking with emotion, began to sing. Not the polished Vegas productions they'd rehearsed, but raw, stripped-down versions of songs that mattered. He sang gospel numbers his mother had taught him. He sang "That's All Right," his first single, with a passion that took it back to its roots. He sang songs he'd never performed live before, deep cuts from albums the Colonel had dismissed as uncommercial. Between songs, he talked, really talked, in a way he'd never done from a stage before. He talked about growing up poor, about the crushing weight of fame, about losing himself in Hollywood, about being afraid to fail. He talked about his mother, about gospel music, about the black artists who'd taught him to feel music in his bones. He talked about his fears, his doubts, his gratitude. The carefully constructed persona of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, crumbled that night. And what emerged was Elvis Aaron Presley from Tupelo, Mississippi. Just a man who loved music and needed to be loved in return. The band followed his lead beautifully, improvising, supporting, giving him space to be authentic. And the audience, those 50,000 people who had come expecting a Vegas spectacle, received something infinitely more valuable. They received the truth. They received an artist at his most vulnerable, an icon revealing his humanity, a king stepping down from his throne to kneel among his subjects. The show lasted 3 hours instead of the scheduled 90 minutes. Elvis sang until his voice was nearly gone, until his fingers bled on the guitar strings, until every ounce of emotion had been wrung from his body. When he finally said goodnight, the standing ovation lasted 23 minutes. People were sobbing. Strangers were hugging. Something sacred had happened in that room, and everyone who'd witnessed it knew they'd seen something that would never be repeated. That night changed Elvis, though perhaps not in the ways we might hope. He continued the Vegas residency and many more after that. The pills didn't stop. The isolation deepened. The trajectory toward his eventual death in 1977 continued, just as his vision had shown him. But something was different too. In the years that followed, those who knew him best said he carried himself with a kind of peace he'd never had before. The peace of someone who'd seen both sides of the veil and chosen his path with open eyes. The recording of that night mysteriously disappeared. Some say the Colonel destroyed it, fearing it was too raw, too real for commercial release. But the 50,000 people who were there never forgot. They told their children and grandchildren about the night the king froze on stage, about the hymn that brought him back, about the 3 hours when Elvis Presley let his soul show. What moment of raw human vulnerability from a performer has moved you most? Share your story in the comments. Let's keep this conversation about authenticity and connection alive.